to the millionaires. So we could find some things there, but even with that, I think we are going to be resource constrained. So I think the idea that there'd be a big chunk of money to, additional money to support creative work, I just think it is unlikely. And, again, the other part of the story, I think copyright is a technical matter. It is very, very difficult to enforce in the internet age. And, I have to say I don't like the idea, and maybe there's a way around it, but I don't like the idea of, having spyware, whatever you want to call it. I don't mean to use a derogatory term there, but, software that is going to be monitoring, what I use, what music I play, what books I might read. I really don't like that idea.
Okay.
I actually would agree with that. I don't like that idea either. There's a way, that's a technical issue that I think can be easily resolved. Well, maybe not easily resolved, but it can be resolved technically. But I stand in agreement with you on the principle. I also would say that the reason why Europe can engage in its support, its subsidy system for artists and writers, and at the same time respect copyright even more than we do in this country, is because they don't have an empire any longer. Their colonial empires have now are under the umbrella of the American soldier. And that's our great tragedy, that we have now entered at this new age of being an empire, and the costs will be astronomical because the ambitions of the empire builders are now global.
Okay, on anyone else want to say? Then I'm going to ask a question. You're thinking of the consumers, and you're thinking of the producers. I'm going to think about it from the perspective of the government. Suppose I were an ambitious college student who needed to find a way to get through college. I have to write term papers. What would stop me from registering as a writer and using those term papers as examples of my product so that I could qualify to be subsidized as a writer? How do you distinguish a, quote, real writer from a, quote, entrepreneurial writer?
It's the exact same story you face now. If you're a student and you want to get a copyright on your term paper and market it, you're totally free to do that.
But you're not going to make any money from it.
Well, you probably wouldn't make any money from your term paper in the artistic freedom voucher system either.
Tell me why you wouldn't.
Because no one's going to give you money. You have to either get some individual to say, "Oh, that's good work. That's a writer I want to support," or alternatively, you'd have to get one of the intermediaries to say, "Oh, we recognize this person's a good writer. We're willing to give that person, whatever it might be, $100,000 a year, $20,000 a year, whatever it might be."
So this entrepreneurial college student goes around to all their family and their friends and their neighbors and door to door and talks about the tax deduction they will get by contributing the money, and it's a good cause, especially if you have a large family. It could be a really good cause.
That's right.
And your entrepreneurial college student could use the tax deductions available to all sorts of people to put themselves through college.
Well, guess what? This entrepreneurial student, if they're out there, they have a great opportunity to do that today. They get to set up Joe Entrepreneur's charity, or church, and they can get their friends and family members, instead of to give them $100, they can get them give $100,000. They kick back, the $75,000 that's actually out of pocket, and then they take the $25,000 and get as a tax deduction. So, if we want people to scam the system, it's easy to do it in a much bigger way now. People will scam the system. I'll absolutely guarantee you. There won't be a system you'll ever see that someone won't scam. The point here is that if you do it on a small scale, this clever college student goes around and, hits up, 100 family and friend. Well, we wasted $10,000. They don't like to see that, but, that's going to happen. If they do it, if they round up, say, 100,000 people like that, I think they're going to get nailed and then spend some time in jail. So,
Jerry?
I really don't have any comments about that one.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions?
I have some concern
Wait.
Wait.
First, identify yourself.
Oh, my
Speak
name
into the mic.
I'm Seaman Rejali, and psychologist, and also member of Writers Union, more than 10 years. I can't remember when they established in Washington, D.C. And as a clinical psychologist, I have some concern about your suggestion to give a book free, because I don't know how much the consumer who reads that takes seriously. And really, if there is a research done both way to compare and about the product of reading to take serious for a free book and the other one who was paid. I'm not for expensive book, just even I would suggest even the other book, if it's free, $2 is better than zero, because of the consumer to take serious that participated and paid for that. That is my concern.
That is a reasonable issue, and I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I don't know. People do. Something that's expensive, people obviously value, even if it doesn't have any intrinsic value. If you go to over the bookstore here and you see that a book's selling for $60 or something, you're inclined to take it more seriously. You may hate the book, you may decide it's worthless, but you're likely to take it at least somewhat seriously. I don't think there's a way of divorcing altogether people's view towards something from the price. I mean, it goes completely at odds with economics, because standard economics, because they're supposed to believe it is divorce. I think that may change over time. So in a world where you have some books that are free and some that are costly, then people may have that attitude. But if it became standard, you got used to I get on the phone, and for practical purposes, I'm not paying anything. Actually, I'm not. I have a flat fee, so I'm literally not paying anything. So I don't put less value on my phone call because it's free. So because we come to see you, that's the norm. You expect your phone calls to be free, or very, very cheap at least. So I think that over time that may well change, but I wouldn't doubt that at least initially you may have this idea that this material over here is free. Whether it's books or music, so that's not as good as the stuff that you're paying the music industry or a publisher for. But I would hope, at least, and that may or may not be true, that over time that would change.
I'm not thinking about free. I'm thinking about the person would take more serious. For example, I have some session on clinical basis. If they pay for the clinical session, they would take seriously, and I see the change of the behavior.
Yeah.
And if I do sometimes, that even Freud was writing in his book, that for free session, or sometimes thing to help, relative or something, you see they don't take serious, or sometimes they don't come to the session.
Yeah.
So this is something because if they participate and they come, usually they participate to pay for a book. I don't think an expensive book, maybe lower price, but at least to participate themselves buying, maybe they take more serious to read and implement. That was my concern at the psychological base of behavior. Thank you.
Well, actually, we have a situation similar to that right now. In our delegate assembly in Boston this year, in August. At that time, there was a gathering of bloggers in Chicago, I guess every year or every 2 years, and there was a large group in a workshop that were calling for trying to decide whether or not they should unionize. And the reason why these bloggers were raising that question is because they're getting hit with the reality that they're not getting an income from their work, at least not enough to survive on. And yet there is clearly some companies that own websites that are doing very well. Thank you very much for your free contribution, and so on. Now, having said that, what I don't want to do is denigrate the dream of a time when the culture in this country, maybe in the world, would change. That people would indeed understand the usefulness of something is not necessarily commensurate with its monetary value. As a matter of fact, where we can, you might say, rescue the useful value, the use value from the exchange value. That kind of concept talks about an entirely different kind of culture. And so we're talking, to a certain degree, it's almost like musical. I'm thinking of Brubeck. time signatures. We're looking at time going through different stages. I think someday we may actually have that, because I think that's what's going on with the young people. They're beginning to realize that we are beginning to realize that there's an alternative. I'm talking about my generation, that there's an alternative, and that they're talking about that alternative. And what I see there is the birth of a new society that's beginning to break against the constraints of the old. And that's where my hope is. Meantime, to get there, I have to make sure writers keep writing.
Okay, do we have any last questions before we close? Right here. Please identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Joshua Lanier. I'm from the Center for Economic and Policy Research. And I guess my question relates to modifying copyright laws. I think there's a general consensus that the way copyright works right now isn't really in the best interest of the writer. It's a lot more in the best interest of the publisher. And if that's the case, is there, like, what would be the general modifications in the copyright laws, or what you'd like to see the unions do? And then I would also like to hear Dean explain if yes, why the voucher system would make more sense than the quote-unquote ideal copyright system. So.
I'll do the last word.
Well, I just say it's hard for me to criticize the ideal copyright system until I've heard it.
Gerard, you go first, because Dean had to go first for all
That's
this.
correct. That's correct. Well, one of the changes in the copyright law that we've been talking to some members of Congress about is removing, for instance, what we consider to be impediments to equal access to the law. There is punitive damages awarded to authors whose works have been infringed under copyright law when it's a willful intent. And the problem is, to get access to it, you have to register with the U.S. Copyright Office to work. There might indeed be an example of a legacy from an earlier period that I think should be eliminated. I don't think we need that much. Other countries have eliminated it, not all, but we have the capacities to register, to know who is doing work without necessarily having an impediment there as a price of not registering. So it is a question of equal access to the law for us. And as you know, a lawyer will not take many of these infringement cases unless punitive damages are involved. It's simply not worth it to settle just for compensatory damages. You may know that that's one of the problems we had around the Ticini case. Most writers do not register their works because it's a burden. Every time you make a variation in your work, to have it covered, that variation, you have to register. Now, there are ways of packaging these things and so on, where the fees are a little less, but it is a burden for small authors. It's not a burden for the big publishing companies, and as you know, in book publishing, they automatically register the work. We would like to see, for instance, periodicals do the same thing. It's not fair just that periodicals copyright their issue as their issue, but do not also do what book publishers do and make sure that the copyright of the individual contributor is also protected. Freelancers in particular is what I'm talking about, not work for hire. So that's one aspect. There's some other changes, but I think that's the most important right now, the most possible in Congress at this point. Oh, this one collective bargaining rights for freelance writers.
I guess the main thing is I really do want to see creative material available at its cost, which is essentially zero. And any copyright, almost any copyright rules will restrict that. So I really want people to be able to get, music, video material, written material. I want them to be able to get that at its cost, and its marginal cost, I should say, and that's zero. And again, I recognize the need very much to, we want the writers, the creative workers to be compensated, and that's the whole point of designing an alternative system. But, once the material's there, the cost is zero, and that's, rather than spending all this effort to try and figure out who read what or heard what or whatever, I'd rather just say, okay, go ahead, listen to it, go ahead, read it, go ahead, do whatever with it, and, try and find another way to ensure that the creative workers are compensated.
Okay, any more questions?
It was just one that I asked before.
Yeah, I just wanted to explore again, supposing what about the publishers? So here's a hypothetical. Let's say I get $50,000 voucher 1 year, and or annually, that wouldn't be so bad. But at any rate, but then let's say that's to help me research and write my book. Then I turn it over to the publisher. Now, because I've signed into this system, I have no copyright. Okay? Then the publisher takes my work and sells it, and they make a bundle of money, and I get nothing.
Guess what? Under my system, the publisher has no copyright either. So the publisher, if they make a bundle of money, they're going to have to be very creative because they don't have a copyright on that.
Well, then, what's going to happen to publishers?
Well, they'll either take part of the system as intermediaries or they'll be out of business. Again, they'll have the option to stay in the copyright system, but if they're in this system, then they have to negotiate terms with intermediaries. Or they could go around and say, look, we publish great stuff. Give us send us your money.
Yeah, but I'm thinking now we're talking real world here.
Yeah.
Jerry was describing the profit margins that publishers now have to make, which is what was it, 20%, like cable TV? How the hell are they going to make that kind of profit?
Well, they would.
Right, so they're not going to. So they're going to go out of business. So they're going to be They're going to be a hell of a lot fewer publishers. So who's going to do the work of? Responsible. I mean, there is good things that publishers do. They edit. They make sure that your book is of a certain standard. They send it out and it gets reviewed. And usually reviewers will pay attention to the better publishers, so to speak. I mean, what's going to happen to all of that? And what's going to happen to the marketing of the book? How are they going to market the book? How are they going to promote it?
Well, you didn't, nothing when you said there'll be fewer publishers. What you described as a situation where the big publishers today would go out of business, so you would see a different model. So yeah, and after I've just heard Jerry speak very eloquently about how bad the current model is, I'm not quite sure why you want to protect it.
Okay, we have time for one last question, if there's anyone who wants to ask it. Okay, would either of you like to make some summing up comments?
Well, I like to make a point that I've followed Dean Baker's work, and I want to tell you I admire your work very much, and I admire the work that the Center does. And I celebrate the fact that we could have this discussion and have a debate in a healthy manner, because we're both starting from the same place, and that is that we want the American people to have access to information, to entertainment, to all the things that enrich their lives, and at the same time protect our democratic principles. We may have a little difference about how we do that, but I think we're both on the same page about where our values are.
Yeah, and I'll just agree with that and say I really appreciate this. And again, it's unusual turf for me to be arguing with a union person, because I've never had it before. I hope I never have it again. But anyhow, I think we're very much on the same page. There's some little differences, but hopefully we'll have some we do have an awful lot of common ground, and we'll occasionally work together.
And thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.